The Monster of Florence, an Endless Mystery. Welcome to the channel. Today I will take you inside one of the darkest and most mysterious cases in Italian crime news, the Monster of Florence, a case that shook Italy for over 2 decades, leaving behind a trail of death, fear, and disbelief. Who was the Monster of Florence? Why did he act so ruthlessly? And above all, why does this case still remain shrouded in mystery today? The beginning of the blood trail. It all began way back in 1968, when a young couple was found dead in a car in the countryside of Signa, near Florence. The bodies of Antonio Lobianco and Barbara Locci were discovered riddled with bullets from a .22 caliber pistol. What seemed like a crime of passion, however, would prove to be just the beginning of a series of brutal murders that would terrorize the region for over 20 years. Lobianco was a bricklayer. He was 29 and married. Locci was a housewife. She was 32 and also married. The two were lovers, and at the time of the attack, in the car with them, there was also Natalino Mele, the 6-year-old son that the woman had with her husband Stefano Mele, a Sardinian laborer who had lived in Tuscany for several years. The two lovers died because of 8 gunshots fired at close range. 4 hit her and 4 hit him. The cartridge cases found were Winchesters marked with the letter H on the base. The gun was not found and never will be. The first person suspected of the murder was her husband, Stefano Mele. However, there were many inconsistencies in the story. Mele was completely incapable of handling a weapon. He confused the window towards which the shots were fired, but he proved to know 3 details that only someone who had witnessed the scene could have known. He changed his version of events many times. First he denied everything, then he accused and involved in the investigation other lovers of his wife who were Sardinian like him, Salvatore and Francesco Vinci, for whom the investigation spoke of the Sardinian lead. And then he exonerated them. In the end, he confessed and said he had done it. Even the child, who at first said he had not heard anything, finally admitted to having seen his father that night. In 1970, Stefano Mele was sentenced by the court of Perugia to 14 years in prison. The story seemed to have ended there. Instead, 15 years later, this crime was linked to the following ones. In 1974, another double homicide struck the province of Florence. This time, Pasquale Gentilcore and Stefania Pettini were found dead in a field. Here too, the same .22 caliber pistol and an inexplicable ferocity. Stefania Pettini was found with her body mutilated, a sign of sadism that indicated a killer capable of horrible actions. The two lovers had been dating for about 2 years, and at the time of the attack they were in a car on a dirt road. He was hit 5 times, she 3. She was taken out of the car still alive and stabbed dozens of times. A vine shoot was inserted into her vagina and her left breast and pubic area were removed. His body was also stabbed with a knife. The investigation revealed that the woman had confided in a friend that she had had an unusual encounter with a person the day before, and her driving instructor said that they had been stalked during a lesson. In 1981, there were 2 double murders. The first occurred in Scandici on the night between June 6th and 7th. Giovanni Foggi, 30 years old, and his girlfriend Carmela Denuccio, 21 years old, had gone off in their car. She was found mutilated at the pubic area like Stefania Pettini. After the June crime, a man was suspected and arrested, but he was acquitted because a new murder was committed while he was in prison. In October in Calenzano, Stefano Baldi, 26 years old, and Susanna Cambi, 24 years old, were killed. The method was the same as in the other cases. The 2 fiancés were in a car along a dirt road. The murderer fired several shots and then wounded and mutilated her body with a knife. The woman had told her mother that she was being followed. The murders of Paolo Menardi and Antonella Migliorini date back to June 1982. The two were in a car in Baccagliano, a hamlet of Montespertoli, stopped in a widening of a provincial road. This time things went differently. The first shots fired did not kill Paolo Mainardi, and the man, probably sitting in the driver's seat, was initially only wounded. According to the most shared version, he managed to start the car and cross the road. Then the killer shot again, hitting the two boys again. The place was not very isolated, and the killer did not have time to mutilate the woman's body because probably it would have been too risky. The car in the middle of the road and the bodies of Paolo Mainardi and Antonella Migliorini were in fact found shortly after. She was dead. He was still breathing, but died the next day in hospital without having regained consciousness. This crime also marked a turning point in the investigation. The investigators in fact linked the crimes of 1974, 1981, and 1982 to the one that had occurred 14 years earlier in Signa, for which a man, Stefano Mele, had already been convicted. The weapon used in 1968 was the same one used in the subsequent murders. When the connection was made, the investigators remembered Mele, questioned him, and he went back to accusing Francesco Vinci. In August of 1982, Vinci was arrested for mistreatment, and 2 months later, he was also accused of being the Monster of Florence. Then a new murder occurred, and Vinci was released from prison. He was found murdered in 1993, together with a friend in a pine forest. On September 9, 1983, in Giogoli, in the municipality of Scandicci, 2 German tourists were killed. They were both males. One of them had long hair and was probably confused with a woman. The bodies were not mutilated. At that point, and always on the basis of new statements by Stefano Mele, his brother and brother-in-law were investigated. While they were in prison, a new double homicide was committed, the penultimate one. Claudio Stefanacci and Pia Gilda Rontini were killed in July 1984, while they were in their Fiat Panda parked on a dirt road near Vicchio. They were in the back seat, and her body was stabbed, and her pubic area and left breast mutilated. The date of the last double homicide, the 8th, is unclear. It was September in 1985, but the bodies of Jean-Michel Kravaichvili and Nadine Moriot, also stabbed and mutilated, were found days after the attack. They were inside their tent in Scopetti in the municipality of San Casciano Val di Pesa. A few days after the discovery of the bodies, a piece of the woman's breast was sent to the Florence prosecutor's office in an anonymous envelope addressed to Silvia Della Monica, the prosecutor in charge of the investigation. The Monster of Florence always acted in the same way. His victims were always young couples who went to isolated places to seek intimacy. The killer watched them, struck them suddenly and with precision, shooting with his .22 caliber. But that was not all. After killing them, he often mutilated the women's bodies, removing intimate parts with almost surgical precision. This detail made the Monster of Florence one of the most terrifying serial killers in Italian history. The murders continued until 1985, leaving behind a total of 16 victims in 8 separate incidents. All the crimes had one thing in common: the .22 caliber pistol, the mutilations, and the choice of secluded couples. But what made the case even more disturbing was the feeling that the killer knew his movements perfectly, acting calmly and without leaving obvious traces. The investigation into the case was complicated from the beginning. The police were in the dark, unable to identify a motive or a connection between the victims. Investigators initially focused on jealous husbands or ex-lovers, thinking that these were murders of passion, but it soon became clear that they were dealing with an organized and calculating serial killer. In 1981, the case took a turn when an anonymous letter was sent to the newspaper La Nazione containing a fragment of skin removed from one of the victims. This macabre gesture confirmed that the killer was not only a murderer, but also someone who enjoyed terrorizing the public and the authorities. Over the years, various theories were advanced regarding the identity of the Monster of Florence. Some believed that a satanic sect was behind the murders, using mutilations for occult rites. This theory gained traction when links between some suspects and alleged esoteric practices were discovered, but concrete evidence to confirm this lead was never found. Another disturbing chapter in the case is linked to the so-called compagni di merende, a group of men who regularly frequented the places of the murders. Pietro Pacciani, a farmer from Mercatale, was arrested in 1993 on charges of being the Monster of Florence. Pacciani had a violent past and a surly character, but what attracted the attention of the investigators were some inconsistencies in his stories and a possible connection with various murders. In the trial of 1994, Pacciani was convicted of 7 of the 8 murders, but the conviction was overturned on appeal due to lack of evidence. However, shortly before the retrial, Pacciani died under mysterious circumstances in 1998, leaving even more doubts about the identity of the Monster of Florence. Despite the convictions of some members of the Compagnie di Merende, such as Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti, the case of the Monster of Florence remains unsolved. Many believe that the real killer has never been caught, and that the investigation has been hampered by judicial errors and false leads. The precise mutilations and the organized modus operandi suggest that behind these murders, there was a more sophisticated and sadistic mind than the official suspects. Another element that leaves us perplexed is the lack of a clear motive. Who was the Monster of Florence? A sadist who acted out of pure cruelty? Or was there something darker linked to a criminal organization or esoteric rites? In the years that followed, a theory emerged that the Monster of Florence did not act alone, but on commission. Some investigators hypothesized that a more powerful instigator, perhaps a figure from high society, paid to obtain the macabre trophies of the mutilations. This theory was fueled by the apparent discrepancy between the brutality of the murders and the apparent simplicity of the Compagnie di Merende, considered by investigators to be unintelligent characters. The theory of the instigator, however, has never found concrete evidence, and the case of the Monster of Florence remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of crime news. Decades later, the case of the Monster of Florence continues to be a subject of debate. Books, documentaries, and television programs have attempted to reconstruct the events, but without reaching a definitive solution. The dark fascination of this story lies precisely in its complexity and the absence of certain answers. Even today, the main question remains, who really was the Monster of Florence? With this episode, we explored one of the most disturbing cases in Italian history. But the truth is still out there, hidden among investigative errors, false leads, and secrets never revealed. What do you think? Do you have a theory about who the real Monster of Florence was? Leave me your comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of unsolved crimes and never-ending mysteries. Thanks for following along, and I'll see you in the next video.